our users, they saw Saga and the Saga Genesis token as an exclusive membership into this really exciting and growing community, right? Those were the OGs, and there were all these ecosystem teams stepping up and saying like, hey, we see the value in you as users, and we want to build programs that reward and incentivize you to build a relationship with us. And so that was really core to what ultimately sold Saga out. And as we look towards Seeker, when it launches, it will have a Genesis token. There will be similar programs for it. And there will be all of these great apps built exclusively for Seeker that have unique earning opportunities or exclusive features that you can only get because you've got this phone.
If you like the Lightspeed podcast, then you need to subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter, written by a team including yours truly and delivered to your email inbox daily. Lightspeed is your essential daily briefing on all things Solana. Exclusive news, deep analysis, and the latest trends delivered in a way that's digestible and, I think, sometimes kind of funny. Stay ahead of the curve with the same insights that guide readers from Brevin Howard, Gemini, Jito, CME Group, Solana Labs, and Foundation, and many more. The link to sign up can be found in today's show notes or if you go to blockworks.co. Subscribe to the Lightspeed newsletter today. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed, your podcast for all things Solana. I'm your host, Jack Kubanek, joined today by Emmett Hollyer, the general manager of Solana Mobile, which just recently unveiled its new phone, the Solana Seeker, set to ship in mid-2025. Emmett, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, Jack, thanks for having me.
So we're going to get into a lot today about mobile, all these things, but as I was doing my research, skimming your LinkedIn profile before this episode, it didn't immediately seem clear to me the connection between you and mobile. I know Anatoly kind of has some previous work that he did in mobile before coming to Solana, but I'm just curious actually to hear about how you came to be the general manager of Solana Mobile from the background you had previously.
Yeah, so funny enough, I've had mobile experience in a former life. So before I was with Solana Mobile, I was at Google. Before I was at Google, I spent a bunch of years doing basically mobile product consulting. So working with all of these big companies who were saying, hey, it's time for us to build a mobile app. Everybody's doing it. Like, we'd like to do it, but we don't know where to start. And so I really started to get a taste of what it was like to innovate, to ship products quickly, and to try and push things in that role. And it was so mobile centric that I'd always been in love with it. When I was at Google, I spent a few years still kind of close to mobile, but more so as, working with big telcos. And so when the opportunity to come back more consumer facing and building products for actual users that were very mobile centric, it was like an absolute no brainer to come join the team.
Mm-hmm. Are you personally like an Apple or an Android guy? What's outside of the Solana Saga? What do you use in your day-to-day life?
I can honestly say that I go back and forth in a way that I think confuses a lot of people. Most people's relationship with their phone is they stick with one and they don't go back and forth much. But I've always found the innovation that both Apple and the Android ecosystem are doing to be super interesting. So right now, lately, I've been using an iPhone 15 Pro, but before that, in addition to using my Saga, I've used Pixel devices, I've used the Moto X, I've used various iPhones. So I do go back and forth, but lately I've been doing a bit of an iPhone journey.
So you all are building a phone at Solana Mobile, subsidiary of Solana Labs, which initially developed the Solana blockchain. Now, to my understanding, works on sort of applications of Solana. So you have Solana Mobile. There's also like a customer loyalty product. There's a gaming product they're working on. And so I'm curious to ask, kind of speaking of building a new phone company, this Solana Mobile subsidiary, and fighting against that like Android, iOS duopoly. Why is it so difficult to start a new phone company from scratch? Because you would think if there's these qualms people have, they feel like iPhone and Apple aren't innovating much anymore. Okay, why doesn't another tech company create a phone? What's, as someone who's really experiencing this, like, just walk us through what the difficulty is with creating a new phone company from the ground up.
Yeah, there are a ton of actual challenges to briefly run through them. It's very expensive to build hardware. It requires a lot of relationships. You are pulling together parts from various products, various parts manufacturers. You're working with various assembly partners. It's a very global industry in a way that, global distribution for software building is much easier than global distribution for hardware building. So there's just a handful of like, where do you even get started problems when it comes to hardware? But I actually think the most important thing is that you have to have a really good reason to do it. The fact of the matter is the phone markets are reasonably saturated these days, right? Most people who are going to have a mobile phone already have one. The release cycles and the upgrade cycles have started to slow a little bit as innovation has tapered off. And so the idea of becoming a new entrant in this space that is already pretty saturated, where innovation has started to slow, there's not many compelling reasons to just become like yet another phone maker. And so you have to have a really good reason. And for us, we did, right? For us, there is this like very underserved group of users and developers who are crypto-centric that the existing phones, the existing platforms just have not serviced. And so in order to take the control that we needed and to be able to open things up, we had to build our own hardware. But otherwise, it's a really expensive business. Getting something to market takes forever. By the time you've launched it, it feels like everything has passed you by. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But I think for us, we've shown the beginning of something really interesting and something really special because we have a really good reason to be doing it.
I guess that gets into something I wanted to ask you about, maybe more philosophically about the phone, is the idea that this is a crypto-centric phone, or it is a phone that has crypto-centric features. Like, are you really honing in on that niche specifically, or do you see a world where, my dad who's not into crypto is buying the Seeker?
Certainly for Saga and for Seeker, this is a crypto-first device. We've done some things that you can only do when you build hardware in terms of how you're integrating the hardware and the software. And so for us, this is very much a crypto-centric, a Web3 enabled smartphone. Now, it's important that it does all the stuff that a phone does. I can't, for somebody who cares deeply about crypto, who wants to use this potentially as their primary device, I can't put something in their hand that doesn't make phone calls or get on the internet or send emails. Like, it has to do all of the phone things really well in addition to the crypto things. But I would say for these first two generations, we've not thought about it as a, hey, like, get your parent this phone and all of a sudden they'll become a degen over the course of a few weeks. I don't think that's off the table in the long term, right? Maybe there's a world where we become so good at this and we start to build really compelling products in a way that is so different than what Apple and Google and Samsung are doing, that we do find distribution and excitement across like people who are either crypto curious or not there yet. But certainly for the products we've built so far, it's been very, very dedicated towards the people who are already here, are maybe newer here, but not necessarily the people who are a couple of years away.
Yeah, because it seems like a lot of people who are in the Solana world, bought the Saga, things like that, maybe aren't using it as their primary phone. And I've also seen you talk about this as like, this could be your primary device. It could also be like your Web3 phone that you just use for those applications. So I'm curious, like, I don't know, how do you think about that? I feel like one comparison that comes to mind is like a Ledger wallet or like one of these hardware wallets with some extra features, and like it can also go on Twitter. Do you use that kind of frame of reference, or like, I don't know, what is the ideal use, or like your mental framework for how most people will think about this device?
Yeah. So for our phones, first and foremost, I would love for this to be used as a primary device. I think as we look to Seeker is a really exciting product because it's the hardware is exciting. It's this lighter, brighter phone. But importantly, it's at a better price point. We brought it down to $500 and it's available in way more countries. It's available in 57 countries. And so when you look at those markets and what they're using as their primary devices, I'm actually pretty optimistic that this phone is going to be able to check boxes for people who are looking to upgrade to a new primary phone. And so that is definitely what we need to build for. We need to make sure that everything is stable, it's like really solid, and that you can use it as your everyday device. For folks for whom this is maybe a secondary device, or for whom Saga was a secondary device, I think there's still a lot of the same use cases and journeys that have to be accounted for. You can't build this in such a way that it's like all of the great apps that I want to use are totally disconnected from the rest of the world, right? It can't just be Web3, because I do need to like take what I've done and tweet it, or I do want to go check, do research, whatever. And so we definitely build with that in mind. There's no like ideal use case, but I would say for Seeker and specific, for Seeker specifically, I'm very optimistic that it will be the primary phone of more users than we saw for Saga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had one guest on this show who said that the Saga was his primary phone. It was Matt Siegel from Van Eck. Although I heard more recently he dropped it off his bike. He dropped it off of a city bike and it broke. So
we'll have to get him. We'll have to get him a new one. That's good to hear. There are definitely people for whom it's like still their daily device, and I use mine. I go back and forth. Sometimes it's my primary, often it's my secondary. But there are definitely still some people who are excitedly continuing to use theirs on a daily basis.
So I'm curious then, like when you use it as your daily device, because I actually haven't played around with the Saga. It was kind of before my time covering Solana that came out. Just when you use it and you compare it to your iPhone, what are the things that you're like, okay, this needs to improve for this to really be a daily device for people?
As we look towards Seeker and maybe some areas for improvement from Saga, I think first and foremost, when you take a look at the hardware, Saga is this big, beautiful device, but people don't necessarily just want big. It's like big and heavy and definitely had a premium feel to it. But one piece of feedback we've heard from users time and time again is whether this is my primary or my secondary device, I just wanted something that felt a little bit more portable, a little bit more on the go. So that was one of the first things we knew we needed to take a slightly different approach to. The second is on the software side. For people who are transacting constantly, for people who live on chain, who are constantly, in their favorite DeFi apps or gaming on chain or whatever that looks like, there was a lot that we needed to do from a UX perspective just to make that transaction signing flow as magical as possible. When you look at Apple Pay or Google Pay, they really have set a very high bar for what a great payment or transaction experience might look like on a mobile device. And we knew we needed to get to at least that level. And so with Seeker, we've gone and built our own wallet. So we're building Seed Vault Wallet with our friends at Solflare. And the purpose of Seed Vault Wallet is to take the core security platform that we introduced on Saga, which is called Seed Vault, basically keeps user seeds safe from the rest of the operating system and the other apps on the phone. Keep that same core, but build a really mobile-centric wallet on top of that so that your user experience is just super seamless. I'm signing transactions in an instant. I still have the same security. I still feel very confident in my actions, but the UX is just like butter. So that was, I would say, like the other big software step we knew we needed to take in addition to hardware.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So I want to get a little bit into the broader story of Solana Mobile launching the Saga now in mid 2023. Now we're gearing up for the Seeker. About 2 years later, I guess it'll end up launching if it stays on the current timeline. So the Saga comes out. It's a bear market. Seemingly, maybe not as many devices as you hoped for sold. The price gets cut 40% 4 months after it launches. What was it like kind of just at Solana Mobile at the time, having put the work in to get this phone to market? And then, initially those first few months, not a lot of devices were selling. Just kind of walk me through how that felt.
There's a lot you can't control. Certainly market conditions is one of those things. And so when we launched and we were in the depths of a bear, we had confidence in what we had built. We knew that there's an opportunity here to offer better distribution of apps, a more secure mobile experience, and just a better mobile user experience to access crypto apps. But we also knew we just couldn't control the backdrop that we were working against. But our focus remained on bringing great apps into our store. When you look at Saga and when you look at Seeker, one of the really interesting pieces of that is the Solana App Store. That's how we're thinking about our builders and our community, is by offering distribution of these mobile-centric, crypto-centric apps. And so what we ended up doing during that bear market was connecting with the teams who are still building, right? Like the best measure of teams who are going to be successful are the ones who just put their heads down and continue to build, whether it's the market is up or the market is down. And so there were a lot of really focused teams, really product-centric teams who saw the opportunity of mobile, and we just spent time with them. We tried to find ways to help them build the apps that their customers were looking for to distribute through our store. And so we spent some time there just continuing to bring new and unique and potentially exclusive experiences to our store, so that by the time the market did turn around and phones started flying off the shelves, anybody who received a Saga, it had a dApp store that was rich and had all sorts of interesting stuff in it. And now as we look out to Seeker, I mean, since we've announced, it's just been like constant. There's just like constantly teams who are looking to build something great coming to us and saying, we would love to build this app, put it in your store, offer something exclusive for Seeker users. So I think that's kind of been core to our DNA, whether the market is up or down, just is to continue to talk to teams who are building and make sure that they have mobile at top of mind.
I guess another thing that felt pertinent from the first few months was the Saga phone received a very negative review from Marques Brownlee, very popular tech reviewer. He labeled it the biggest bust of 2023 in phones. What was your reaction to the MKBHD review?
We proudly have that trophy on display in our San Francisco office, and it moves around. Team members get an opportunity to carry it with them. And we still talk about the fact that we're award winning, right? Like when you create a new category and you win an award, you have to call yourself the first award winning crypto phone. But, when it comes down to it, when you look at reviewers like Marques or other just traditional consumer tech reviewers, they have a very different rubric that they think about products against. The way that they think about phones or any sort of consumer electronic device is inevitably set against like the 15 years that have come before. And for us, introducing a new product, it was unreasonable that we were going to all of a sudden educate somebody like Marques on why Web3 is exciting, why there are millions of people around the world who are excited about the future of decentralization. And so, his review, I think, was fair at times, maybe less fair at others, but ultimately, like, that's his job, is to grade against the rubric that he's created. We cared less about what he had to say and more about what our users had to say. And the feedback from our users was that this was filling a need for them. And while there was room for improvement, they were very, very excited about the first generation of product that we had built.
Mm-hmm. And so you go through those first, several months post-launch. The negative Brownlee review comes out. You cut the price, and then I think mid-December or so, these phones start selling really fast. You sell out of Solana Mobile devices in the US. This is largely driven by excitement around Bonk and airdrops that came with the phone. At what point did you realize, like, oh, there's this random uptick in phone selling? And did you immediately know it was kind of airdrop driven, or were you just like, what's going on? What was that like?
Yeah, we keep close tabs on how things are going. We have a Slack bot that when things start ticking up, we see it. There's a bunch of us in there. So we knew pretty quickly what was happening. And of course, it took 10 seconds on Twitter to understand what was going on. It was like crazy. It was honestly like face melting just to have like all of this volume of orders flowing through. It was really exciting, but also meant we had to prepare to send out 15,000 phones in a very short order. But I think as we look back, we kind of embraced that. I think it was a really important story for us to understand that our users, they saw Saga and the Saga Genesis token as an exclusive membership into this really exciting and growing community, right? Those were the OGs, and there were all these ecosystem teams stepping up and saying like, hey, we see the value in you as users, and we want to build programs that reward and incentivize you to build a relationship with us. And so that was really core to what ultimately sold Saga out. And I think you can imagine as we look towards Seeker, we expect to see and have already started to see some of the same patterns where Everybody who buys a Seeker, they get a Chapter 2 pre-order token, and that pre-order token has already become a magnet for various rewards and incentive programs across the ecosystem. And as we look towards Seeker, when it launches, it will have a Genesis token. There will be similar programs for it, and there will be all of these great apps built exclusively for Seeker that have unique earning opportunities or exclusive features that you can only get because you've got this phone.
Yeah, so I'm curious to dig a little deeper with how you feel about the kind of airdrop token connection with the Solana mobile phones, because the first like when that phone was selling like crazy in December, it wasn't because the tech had necessarily improved overnight. It was that people really wanted to get bonk. It was like an investment. And with the pre-orders of the second Solana phone, it feels like for a lot of people, it's the same rationale this time around. So I spoke with someone on Twitter who pre-ordered 40 Solana phones, and presumably he doesn't need 40 Solana phones, but if it comes with all these airdrops, you can potentially make a profit off of it. And so, that you could argue maybe feels a little bit smoke and mirrorsy, but at the same time, there's also a way to look at this where it's like, this is how you kind of kickstart a new phone brand. Whereas you mentioned it's really hard to break into the duopoly world that exists right now. It's hard to find the funding. And, I don't know what the latest number is for pre-orders, but the Seeker has done, dozens of million in revenue. And that's like money that's really hard to raise for a new phone company. And sort of the speculative frenzy surrounding the Seeker, I think, drives that. So I'm of two minds on this. I'm just curious how you think about airdrops or sort of what your take is on their connection with what you're building.
The fact that some users are coming into this ecosystem because they see an opportunity to earn is not a bad thing, right? It's something for us to optimize for. Earning opportunities don't just have to be airdrops. They don't just have to be, I bought a thing and I just started receiving all sorts of random tokens. There are a bunch of really interesting use cases that still play to those same motivations, right? Think about you've got your phone with you all the time. If one of the reasons you've bought that phone is to earn as much as you can, then put it to work, right? Like lend some background compute to train AI models and get a little bit of money for doing so. Offer up your GPS coordinates to help triangulate other sensors in a more precise way. Map mobile networks. I think the breadth of opportunities to earn and see rewards in Seeker go well beyond just meme coins and airdrops. Not to say that those aren't important, right? For some users, they are. They're enough of an incentive to come in. But I think we feel really confident that there will be additional, more compelling, more value additive earning opportunities, and that some of the experiences that teams build that are in the store will go far and away above users' expectations and honestly serve as a little bit of a Trojan horse, right? Like come for the rewards, stay for the experience is something we say constantly. And I think it's impossible to just avoid the fact that that is a motivation for some. And so we just have to kind of lean into it.
So it sounds like you're saying that this isn't necessarily a temporary thing. Like the airdrops speculation side of the phone is sort of there to stay.
I think maybe the way I would frame it is that the flywheel is getting started. So if we think about developers coming to our store, they don't have to pay 30% of their revenue back to us. They just get to keep everything. And so if they're going to build an app and they're going to get to keep all the revenue, then maybe rather than give 30% back up to the marketplace maker, they'll return some amount of that back to their community, which is something we saw on Saga and something we expect to see on Seeker. So I think what we think is, okay, builders incentivize users to give them a shot. And then once users start to build sticky habits, start to build behaviors, and those businesses start to grow, they can return some of that value back to users and just kind of keep things moving. By us not sitting in the middle and enforcing insane policies or asking that anybody give us 30% of the revenue that's generated, there's an opportunity to get something really interesting started and flying. And we saw bits and pieces of that with Saga, but we were seeing it evolve and become more mature with Seeker. So I do expect that for anybody who buys this phone, they'll have access to those unique earning rewards opportunities for sure.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, as you mentioned, the Apple App Store famously charges a 30% commission on sales on the app, and folks, including like Epic Games, very famously have voiced a lot of frustration with this. And you talk a lot about the duopoly being, the Play Store and the App Store, and there aren't other options for places to get your apps or to have mobile experiences. And it's very obvious to me why, if you're a developer, you would want to fight the duopoly because you don't like having to give 30% of your revenue to Apple. It feels extractive. I'm curious, how do you see, like, what's the benefit of a different alternative app store for users? Because, like, as a user, I don't see Apple taking the 30% cut. It doesn't appear obvious to me that it's necessarily a bad thing that I only have these two app stores if it has the apps I want to use. So I'm curious how you think about why users would care about breaking up the duopoly.
Three things. One is users who are in this space care about a decentralized future. I think, just making a quick philosophical argument before like the actual tangible day-to-day benefits. I think it's sort of intoxicating to be a part of what the next wave might look like. And if that in any way changes how the relationship between developers and users exists in the future, I know personally I would love to be a part of that. And so I do think that is a streak that some of our users share, where yes, that doesn't make a difference in your day-to-day experience, but knowing that you're contributing to a more decentralized future is important to people in the space. I think the other two things are, one, that I have access to apps that I don't have access to in those stores. There is a very clear restriction against crypto-centric apps, both for Google and Apple. And so there are examples of apps who get through. Some reviewer on one day was feeling generous and accidentally let something through. That app then has an impossible time trying to get updates submitted. But ultimately, it's, otherwise, there's just a ton of stuff missing from those stores that you'd love to have access to on a day-to-day basis. So that's one, is like actually having access to crypto apps that would otherwise be barred from these app stores. And then the second is from the 30% perspective. Yes, as a user, I don't necessarily know or care that the 30% cut is going to go to Apple or Google. But the impact that has is, well, then there's less of an incentive to create a rewards program for me to join an app or build a relationship with that builder. And also, there's just some economic models that would never work, right? Imagine selling an NFT. As a user, I sell an NFT, and the marketplace is going to have to pay 30% of that transaction back to some Google or Apple platform. Inevitably, they're going to pass that on to me. And so if they have to do that, they know I'll never just buy and sell on their platform. And so the platform never exists to begin with. So I think from a user perspective, there's the philosophical, I want to help fight the duopoly, but I have access to apps that I wouldn't otherwise have access to. And there are apps whose economic models can exist and reward me for building a relationship with them through this store as opposed to the other stores.
You were ready for that answer. I love that. You had them ready to go, the 3 points. So there's a couple things I want to dive deeper into there. The first is, just as a quick aside, I'm curious what it's like running this company, I think US based, and trying to get apps onto an app store in the US when famously there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty right now. Like, what is and isn't going to be available in the US, and just what's that experience been like trying to operate here?
Yeah. So our team is somewhat globally distributed. We have, we have a good number of folks who are in the US, who are spread sort of across the US, but we do also have some engineers who are based over in Europe. As far as teams who are building are concerned, we have a pretty global footprint of teams. Now, some teams do have their own geolocation restrictions against certain markets, but ultimately, we're not mandating that teams follow any sort of policies that we set out, right? They know what policies they have to follow and what regulatory frameworks they have to follow. All that we're offering is an opportunity to distribute to users. And so because we are shipping Seeker into 57 countries, we're covering a pretty meaningful portion of the world. And so if we're covering so much of a global footprint, for maybe the teams who have restrictions in certain markets, it's probably still in their best interest to distribute through us because they will have access to users in markets that they do care about. With Seeker, more than half of our pre-orders are from Southeast Asia. And so that to us is super exciting because it means a market, APAC broadly, a market that we didn't have any opportunity to sell this first device in, all of a sudden is going to come online. And so if you're an app builder, that's a whole new market segment and a whole new set of users that I didn't have access to at Saga that I can now start building a product for. So it's less of a concern for us because we do have such a global distribution offering at this point, but certainly it's something that teams need to think about.
So you mentioned APAC. While we're speaking of markets, you mentioned there's a large volume of these phones selling in APAC. I feel like the recent Token 2049 and then Breakpoint kind of Korea Blockchain Week 2 conference season opened a lot of eyes to just how big of a market Asia is for crypto. I was curious to ask, well, let me start with this. Where do you think a lot of that demand is coming from that you're seeing in APAC? Like, just to the extent you have intel there, what's causing the large influx of demand from APAC for the Seeker?
As far as like broader demand for blockchain and blockchain-based products, I don't have great intel. I'm sure there's somebody who's got really interesting insight on that. I could hypothesize a few things, but we are definitely seeing like a generally rising tide in those markets. As it relates to Seeker specifically, this is the first phone we've been able to sell into those markets. And so for everybody who had FOMO with the first device or couldn't have access to it, this is their opportunity to jump in. And so in addition to that, the other piece is it's a relatively Android-friendly market. Seeker is an Android-based phone. And so some of the lock-in effects of iMessage or iCloud or iPhoto, those don't exist in those markets, right? People use different communication apps. They don't rely on iMessage. They don't necessarily have iPhones. There's a lot of really exciting Asian-made Android devices. And so the switching effects will be a lot less. So I think it's a combination of those factors. It's like the first time they've been able to buy the phone, and it's going to be a little bit less disruptive to their mobile journey otherwise. But yeah, I don't have a great sense as to why the tide continues to rise over there, but it's certainly exciting for us.
And the other part of this I wanted to get into is I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about super apps in Asia. Like, a lot of Asian countries have this affinity for like the WeChat style super app where within one app you can do many different things. Whereas in the US, we really like our like app ecosystem, and you exit and go into a different app for each little thing you do. And it got me thinking that the super app feels more obviously like it would benefit from crypto integration than maybe like the American style have a million different apps where you have to move the liquidity around all the time. So I don't know, have you talked to app developers, or have you put any thought into what crypto integration with like a APAC style super app might look like?
There are absolutely opportunities there to start to consolidate some things. Right now in our app store, we don't have anything that I would call like a traditional super app, but there are certainly, some teams have started to bring various products and services together. When you look at the Jupiter team, for example, they're taking really interesting steps in the mobile space so that my entire DeFi journey can be driven from one place. I think one of the challenges in terms of building a true super app in Web3 is we all like love and appreciate the decentralization, the fact that I have a wallet that is composable with all of these different apps and experiences. That is something that we sort of believe in the ethos of. And so by rebundling all of that, it's inevitably going to happen. You can create better user experiences when you do bring all of those pieces together. But there will always be some holdouts who want to be able to like connect their wallet in the places that they want to connect and not need to stay in one place. What I will say also on the mobile front is, as a mobile user, if an app is built really well to the point where if I want to accomplish something, I open the app, I'm 1 to 2 taps and I'm done, and I can put the app back away, I'm more likely to go back to it. And so being able to build habits through really simple, really efficient UX for certain use cases is often a better route than asking people to just like stay there and kill all their time in an app. So it's a mix. I'm sure we'll see a lot of really interesting super app experimentation though.
I also want to get a little bit here into the DApp store, as you're calling it. Something that we have talked about a bit on Lightspeed, and I think a lot of people are grumpy about in crypto right now, is just the lack of usable apps. It feels like there's lots of different ways to build apps, but maybe Polymarket aside, or Polymarket and Helium aside, there aren't a lot of like apps that people regularly use that aren't real degen kind of trading meme coin type stuff. So I'm just curious if you've run into that frustration, or kind of your take on just the app ecosystem as it exists today.
There's definitely room for improvement. I think taking a more consumer-centric approach to building products, rather than just building products for the sake of the underlying technology, actually building a product because it solves a problem for a user, there's still a lot of room on that front. And then once you have identified the problem, building something with a really seamless experience is kind of the next hurdle. I think for the first cohort of apps who are in our store, I think they've thought about our users as an opportunity to beta test, which is great. Like the people who are early adopters of this phone are probably the right people to beta test something with. They're the type of people who will give you feedback. They might be a little bit more tolerant as you're smoothing out some corners or whatever it is that you're doing. And so I think we are excited that our users get early access to things, even if it means the experience could be a little bit better. But I am hopeful that teams will continue to become more and more mature. When you look back to like the early days of that Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, like those apps were really hilariously bad in retrospect, right? Like the most memorable ones were like the gags, the fart machines and the air horns and the chugging of beer. Like that's what's memorable, not things that were useful. And so I think kind of in a similar way, some of the more meme coin based or like fun, just pure fun experiences right now will be the things that we remember as teams start to build more mature products that are actually solving problems in the next few years here. I think it'll take some time. Like I think teams are still working through it, but we even at Breakpoint saw a bunch of teams who are thinking about what consumers want and need and how building something that's blockchain based can actually solve those problems.
Something that maybe some people hear when we complain about apps, you talk about something like a integrated wallet, the Seed Vault wallet. People's eyes maybe glaze over because they're like, whatever, there's a million wallets. But I actually did want to ask about this because I'm curious, this morning for an article I was working on, I was messing around with like a mobile crypto experience on my iPhone. And I had the one app open, and then I had to click like Phantom Wallet, and then it took me to Phantom, and then I had the Face ID, and then I had to sign the transaction, and then I had to swipe up and go back to the other app, and it didn't work, so I had to do it again. And it was a very like clunky experience. So I'm curious if there's thought into that natively integrated crypto wallet in the Seeker, and how that experience with doing stuff on chain will look differently from how it looks currently on iPhone and Samsung devices.
Yeah, it has to, and it will be a lot better. It should feel seamless. It should feel, like I said earlier, it shouldn't feel that much different from when the little Apple Pay dialog comes up and I, double tap the power button, it does a Face ID and we're off and running. That ease of like use and ease of signing and ease of transaction is the primary motivation for our wallet. And so we're setting a pretty high bar that we want users to have a very similar feeling experience. You shouldn't be stuck in this like terrible world of back and forwards and deep links. And it's like, it's funny. Everyone is just kind of taken for granted that, or not necessarily taken for granted. I would say everybody has grown numb to the idea that accessing things from an in-app browser from within a wallet is actually a terrible experience. When I explained it to people when we started this project a couple of years ago, and I was explaining to friends and family who know nothing about crypto, why you needed to build a phone in order to make better crypto experiences. In addition to talking about security in the store, one of the things I talked about is like everybody who wants to do anything, launch a totally different app and then go to a browser tab and then type in a URL and then connect that within the browser tab of a different app. And that's just not sustainable, but nor is going back and forth. And so we are like 100% thinking about how do you make it feel as native as possible. So you stay in the same place, you sign a message, you establish whatever connections you need to, and you don't have to actually go anywhere. And it just kind of, like I said, feels magic.
What is like the standard for you? You mentioned Apple Pay. And as I think about it, like Apple Pay is maybe the best UX anywhere, like on mobile. I also love the feature of the iPhone where if you have a two-step verification, it'll autofill it for you. That's a great feature they added. But really, I think Apple Pay, and I guess like I don't use Samsung products that much, but there's like a Google Pay or whatever. Is that the standard, or like, I don't know. What do you think are like the UX that you really need to match to be as good?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's like that's the closest corollary that exists on mobile right now, right? Like TradFi payments or traditional payments are the most akin to what we're trying to do with on-chain transactions. And so I think we're borrowing some of the established patterns there, but we also can take that in different ways and take it further, right? For one example is with Seed Vault Wallet. In addition to introducing things like bottom sheets and simplified signing, we're also introducing simplified account management. So that's not necessarily something you think about in an Apple or Google Pay experience is, oh no, which account am I connecting? Is this my main? Do I not feel comfortable connecting this? Should I spin up a new burner? That whole kind of like cognitive load of what should I connect here? Is that thing funded for me to actually take the action I want to? Simplifying that whole journey is something that we have the opportunity to do. And so, yes, taking some cues from some Web 2 interfaces, but also rebuilding a lot based on what we've heard from our users so far.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about is just this afternoon, I was thinking a bit about like a world in which you have like your iPhone for everyday use, and then you have your Web3 Solana Seeker for like crypto use. And I was sort of like that. It's like a weird world where you have two devices that you use for two different things. But this is a weird direction to take it. But I was watching this interview with Mark Zuckerberg recently where he's talking about wearables because Meta has their glasses that they're debuting. And he was talking about how, in his view, in the same way that now you work on your computer and then you take out your phone to do phone stuff, it's going to go like a step more abstract, and you're going to use your glasses for stuff that you would take your phone out for. So as you're building in mobile, what do you think about the other kinds of mobile devices that are growing? We have rings, we have watches, now glasses. Are you interested in those things and sort of like the ability to build them more for Web3? Or how do you think about that other world of mobile?
Totally. Yeah, yes, for sure. I think those are all everything I would put in sort of the ambient computing bucket or the wearables bucket, I think is interesting, right? It's not an area that we've necessarily taken any bets in. We haven't built anything that's not a phone. But I also think taking steps to people not needing their phone out all the time in order to engage is like really important, because otherwise you just create exhaustion. People get super fatigued and burnt out of needing to like constantly have their phone out and tap a million things. And it creates some pretty unhealthy habits. So I think where wearables, some of those ambient devices come in is, how do you make some of the repeatable day-to-day interactions that don't necessarily require like a ton of critical thinking, but rather just an ability to get through really easily on a regular basis. Like that is really kind of cool. So anything related to tracking or some of those simple interactions is great. As it relates to on-chain activity, I don't exactly know what that looks like, right? Like there's definitely some teams who are building some experiments around things like wearables for fitness on chain. I think that's really interesting. To be seen whether people will ever feel comfortable like barking out transaction approvals to like a voice assistant that's sitting on their face. Like maybe we'll get there. I don't know. But like, I think the experimentation is important. I think it's interesting. The less I have to actually pull my phone out, the happier I am. And so, until we get to that point where we can fully trust something that's not our phone, building apps that make actually accomplishing a task as simple as possible is probably like the next best thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer, because I think that there's a lot of projects where, as you mentioned, why do these things need to go on chain? And fundamentally, like, blockchains are, economic instruments. Like, you use them to do things with money. And I think we're in a world where our phones are most like wallets now. Like, you have your Apple Wallet where you store all of your credit cards. I don't see myself doing that in a smart ring. Like, some of these watches can pay for things, but it's clunky, I think, compared to just the experience of doing it on a phone. So yeah, the phones, I think, make the most sense if you're going to do like crypto stuff, and maybe some of that other stuff doesn't need blockchains.
Yeah. And I had the realization recently that like I pull out my phone to pay for things probably 2 to 3x as often as I pull out my wallet, if not more these days. And so to your point, like, we use the blockchain to facilitate transactions and economic activity. Like, there's clearly something to phones because we're already using phones to pay for everything that's not on chain. And so pivoting some of those behaviors to like your phone for your on-chain things is really natural. But to your point, I'm also not necessarily like using other devices to do traditional payments just yet. That might change. I'm not the world's biggest like smartwatch guy, but I know a lot of people love them. My wife never takes hers off. So it's like, there's definitely a difference in opinions on those. But I think broadly speaking, anything that you can do from a hardware perspective that just like simplifies your existence. And I think, wearables have done this, headphones have done this. I think the smart glasses and some of those are becoming really interesting, but it just takes a while to build like a new set of habits, right? Like, we didn't become addicted to our phones for a little bit, and then all of a sudden we got stuck to them. And, that'll change, right? We'll have new hardware that comes out that gets more and more ambient. But for now, it's like my phone is probably the most important physical item that I own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. It's been a really fun episode. If you're with us still, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed as well. And Emmett, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and best of luck with the Seeker.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And just a quick pitch to close us out. For those of you that have purchased Seeker, thank you. We obviously can't wait to put it in your hands. It's going to be shipping in the middle of 2025. For anybody who doesn't yet have Seeker, head to solanamobile.com. Seeker is still available. It's $500. We're shipping it to a whole bunch of countries. It's going to be great. The teams who are building for the phone and the rewards and earning opportunities are continuing to pop up. So we can't wait to get it in your hands. Be sure to order one if you haven't already.
Thank you, Emmett, so much for coming on the show, and take care.